Welcome back to Midnight Whispers. Don't forget to subscribe, turn off the lights, and let's step into something you can't unhear. I never planned to tell this story out loud because saying it makes it feel closer to me again. And I prefer it to stay at a distance where it cannot reach me. But this happened exactly as I remember it. And I am not changing a single detail, even if it makes me sound unstable. I was alone that evening in a way that felt deliberate, like the house itself had decided it wanted privacy. And every room felt still in a manner that pressed against my ears. The air was calm but heavy, and I remember noticing how even the usual sounds of the neighborhood were absent, as if the outside world had paused. I moved through the house slowly, aware of my own breathing, aware of how loud my footsteps felt against the floor. There was nothing unusual at first, nothing that hinted at what would come, and that is what unsettles me the most now. I sat down in the living room and checked my phone, seeing messages from people who were far away, people who could prove I was alone. The clock ticked loudly enough that I remember thinking it needed new batteries, and that thought grounded me for a moment. I stood up to get a glass of water, and the kitchen light flickered in a way that felt normal enough to ignore. As I filled the glass, I felt an odd pressure in my chest, not fear yet, but awareness. I told myself I was just tired, and that being alone too long can make your thoughts stretch in uncomfortable directions. That was when I heard it, clear and precise. Someone calling my name from down the hallway. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't aggressive, but it carried familiarity that made my stomach tighten. The voice used my name the way someone who knows you well would say it, without hesitation or confusion. I froze with the glass still in my hand, water trembling slightly as my grip tightened. My first thought was that I had imagined it, that my brain had created a sound to fill the silence. I waited, holding my breath, listening for movement, listening for anything that would confirm reality. The house answered with nothing, a quiet so deep it felt intentional. I called out, not loudly, just enough to test the space, and my voice sounded wrong to my own ears. There was no response, yet the feeling that someone was present did not fade. I checked my phone again, confirming no one could have arrived without my knowledge. I walked slowly toward the hallway, each step measured, each breath controlled. The walls seemed closer than usual, and the lights felt dimmer, though nothing had changed. I told myself fear was a choice, and that I could choose calm instead. The hallway ended in darkness that felt heavier than it should have been, and I stopped before reaching it. I remember thinking how strange it was that my name still echoed in my head, as if it had been spoken from inside me instead of outside. I turned around and went back to the living room, trying to reclaim normalcy. I sat down and stared at the television without turning it on, listening again. Minutes passed, maybe more, and just when my shoulders began to relax, it happened again. Someone called my name while the house was empty. The voice came from closer this time, close enough that I felt it rather than heard it. My heart began to race, not in panic, but in recognition. I knew that voice, even though I could not place it. I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly, breaking the stillness. I scanned the room, every corner, every doorway, every familiar shape now feeling unfamiliar. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation, because reality depends on those. I checked every room, every closet, every locked door, proving again and again that no one was there. The house offered no answers, only silence that felt observant. When I returned to the living room, the calm I tried to build collapsed. I realized the voice had known exactly where I was both times. That realization stayed with me long after the sound itself disappeared. I did not leave the house right away, because part of me felt that moving would somehow make things worse, like acknowledging it would give it permission. I sat back down and forced myself to breathe evenly, telling myself that fear feeds on reaction. The clock continued ticking, steady and indifferent, mocking my racing thoughts. I tried to replay the sound in my head, analyze its tone, its rhythm, its intent. It did not sound threatening, which somehow made it more disturbing. It sounded patient. I wondered if loneliness could create something so specific, something so personal. I thought about stress, exhaustion, memory, all the things that can blur perception. I told myself that the mind is powerful enough to imitate reality when it wants attention. Still, I kept listening. Every small noise made my muscles tense. Every shift in the house felt amplified. I heard the pipes settle, the refrigerator hum, ordinary sounds that felt staged. I stood up again, unable to stay still, and paced slowly. The hallway drew my attention again, like an unresolved thought. I stood at its entrance, staring into the darkened rooms beyond. I said my name out loud, softly, to hear how it sounded in my own voice. It did not match what I had heard. That difference made my skin crawl. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how alone I truly was. I checked my phone one more time, scrolling aimlessly, grounding myself in the outside world. Messages came in, normal conversations, proof that life was continuing elsewhere. That contrast made the house feel isolated, cut off. I laughed quietly at myself, trying to break the tension, but the sound felt hollow. Then the voice returned, closer than before, speaking my name as if it were standing just behind me. I spun around instantly, heart pounding, adrenaline flooding my system. There was nothing there, no movement, no presence I could see, only the familiar room unchanged. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming to leave. Yet something held me in place, a need to understand. I asked out loud who was there, my voice shaking despite my effort to control it. The house remained silent. That silence felt like an answer in itself. I realized then that whatever was happening was not trying to scare me in an obvious way. It was waiting. I grabbed my keys, my phone, anything that made me feel anchored. As I moved toward the door, the pressure in my chest intensified like resistance. I unlocked the door and stepped outside, the night air hitting me like relief. The moment I crossed the threshold, the feeling lifted. I stood there breathing deeply, listening to the normal sounds of the street. I told myself I was safe now. I stayed outside longer than necessary, unwilling to re-enter. Eventually, I convinced myself that running from it gave it too much power. I went back inside, lights on in every room, daring the house to repeat itself. It didn't. The rest of the night passed quietly, almost peacefully. That calm felt artificial, like the pause after something important. I barely slept, replaying the sound again and again. In the morning, sunlight filled the house, and everything looked harmless. I laughed at myself, embarrassed by my fear. I told no one, because explaining it felt impossible. Days passed, then weeks without incident. Life returned to normal, at least on the surface. I began to believe it had been a one-time break in perception. That belief lasted until I realized something else had changed. I had started responding internally whenever I heard my name, even in crowded places. The sound had followed me, not as a voice, but as a feeling, and I knew then that leaving the house had not ended it. I became more aware of myself after that night, more cautious with my thoughts, more attentive to silence. I noticed how often we hear our names without questioning it, how deeply tied it is to identity. I wondered if that was why it chose my name instead of anything else. The idea unsettled me more than the event itself. I tried to rationalize it as a stress response, something my mind created under pressure. Still, I avoided being alone at night whenever possible. When I had to be, I kept noise playing constantly, filling the space. Silence became something I distrusted. One evening, weeks later, I was reading in bed when the house settled around me. The sounds were normal, but the awareness returned. I froze, listening. I told myself not to anticipate it, because anticipation invites imagination. Then softly, almost thoughtfully, my name was spoken again. It came from inside the room, this time. I did not move. I did not breathe. I stared at the wall, every nerve ending alert. The voice did not repeat itself. It did not need to. Tears filled my eyes, not from fear alone, but from confusion. I felt violated in a way I could not explain. I said nothing, did nothing, and eventually exhaustion pulled me into shallow sleep. In the morning, I told myself I had dreamed it. I needed that explanation to function. But the pattern continued, irregular, unpredictable. Always my name, always familiar, always calm, never aggressive, never urgent. That consistency felt deliberate. I started to question my own memories, my sense of self. I wondered if something inside me was calling out, using a sound I could not ignore. The more I thought about it, the less grounded I felt. I avoided mirrors, avoided stillness. I filled my life with noise and people. Yet even in crowded rooms, sometimes I felt it, that sense of being addressed. I never heard the voice clearly again, but the memory of it stayed vivid. It became a private fear, one I carried quietly. I researched explanations late at night, reading about perception, stress, the brain's relationship with sound. None of it brought comfort. What disturbed me most was how personal it felt, how intimate. It did not feel like an external threat, but an internal one. I began to fear not the house, but myself. I questioned whether I could trust my own senses. I stopped reacting outwardly, deciding that if it wanted attention, I would not give it that satisfaction. That choice seemed to work. The occurrences faded, becoming distant memories. Years passed. I moved to a new place, built a new routine. I believed distance would erase it, and for a long time it did, until one quiet afternoon, alone again, in a completely different house, I heard my name spoken softly behind me. That was when I understood it had never been about the house. It had always known where I was. I don't talk about this because people want neat endings, explanations that restore balance. I don't have that. I live with the knowledge that something addressed me when I was alone, something that knew me well enough to sound familiar. I function normally. I work, I laugh. I exist like everyone else. But there is a part of me that remains alert, always listening. Silence still makes my heart race. I avoid being alone in enclosed spaces when I can. I sleep with background noise, not for comfort, but for protection. I have never heard my name spoken aloud again. Not clearly, not directly. Instead, it lingers at the edge of perception. Sometimes I feel it more than hear it. I've accepted that whatever it was did not intend to harm me physically. That realization does not bring peace. It brings questions. Why my name? Why that familiarity? Why the patience? I no longer believe it was imagination, because imagination does not feel intentional. I believe it was something psychological, but not in the simple way people assume. I believe the mind can open doors we don't know exist. I believe awareness can attract attention. I believe being alone can make you visible in ways that crowded spaces cannot hide. This story is true, every part of it, even the parts I wish weren't. I share it now because carrying it alone has become heavier than fear. If you've ever felt addressed by silence, you may understand what I mean. I don't look for it anymore. I don't challenge it. I live carefully, consciously. Some nights, when everything is still, I feel that familiar pressure, like something considering whether to speak. When that happens, I focus on my breathing and remind myself who I am. I remind myself that names have power, but so does restraint. I don't answer. I never answer, because the one thing I know for certain is this. The night someone called my name while the house was empty was not the beginning. It was the moment I realized I had always been listening.